Then I wondered what influences our vision of society and social protection in particular. And I thought maybe religion could be one factor. That is to say that according to one's religion, we would have different ways to consider society and social protection. But I was not really satisfied because when I looked at it closer, I found that first, all religions share more or less the same principles when it comes to solidarity. And I didn't find any religion which said that we don't have to share our wealth to people in need. Let's take, in Confucianism, altruism is one of the highest value and it's an obligation. And we have to put the welfare of the state before the welfare of the individual. In Buddhism, we have to get rid of our egoism to achieve peace and inner harmony. And there is this notion of interdependence that we can find in one of the very famous discourses of the Buddha, with this analogy of two acrobats balancing on top of the other. And the Buddha says that by protecting oneself, one protects the other. That is to say that we have to ensure our own balance to ensure mutual protection. I think it's quite clear. And by protecting the others, one protects oneself. Because if you don't protect the one who is holding you, you would have some trouble. Then Islam. Well, charity is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it's actually a kind of informal social protection support. You have the zakah, which is the obligation to share one's wealth, and in Islamic states, you have to give 2.5% of your wealth to a fund, which will then redistribute the money. So all religions emphasize these notions of solidarity and rebalancing wealth. And second, it seems quite hard to explain society by the religious factor. I didn't find that it really had a strong impact on social protection. So for example, let's take Singapore, where there is a strong influence of Confucianism. Well, the government has a very limited role regarding social protection, and this redistributive role is not clearly expressed in the constitution. So what's the consequence? Well, the responsibility of protecting each other relies more on individuals and families, and the social security system is based on compulsory savings by individuals and families. And anyway, we can say that there are many other influences in Singapore, Western influence, or it's really hard to put Singapore in a box. And we could say that the main feature of this country is actually pragmatism, and that the government would choose the policies which serve the objective of the government, which is very often economic objective. In Thailand, which is a Buddhist country, the role of the government regarding social protection hasn't been considered as legitimate during a very long time, and until quite recently, that is to say 1990, when the Social Security Act had been passed by the Thai parliament, after 5 years of unsuccessful attempts. And sometimes religion will say one thing, but people will behave very differently. So if you think, for example, of Christians in France or in the US, there are very different opinions regarding universal coverage. So when we try to determine what influences our vision of society and social protection, religion doesn't seem to be a good factor. Sometimes the problem will be money. Let's take Indonesia. There is a law which has been passed in 2004 and which stipulates universal coverage. The constitution states that we should have social security for all, but because of the lack of resources, there are problems of implementation. However, it is not always the case, and sometimes, very often actually, the fundamental issue is not money, it's ideology. People will have different opinions on what is better for them and what should be the role of the government, whether the welfare state should provide social justice because of their ideology. We can say that we have 3 main ideologies: libertarian, liberal, and socialist. And these 3 ideologies, they will have 3 different aims, and according to these aims, they will have different conceptions on the role of the government and the way that we should distribute goods and services. Okay, let's take the aims of these ideologies. For libertarians, the main aim is individual liberty. And the best way to achieve it is private markets. For liberals, it is to maximize the total utility of people. So I don't really have time to explain what is utility, but let's say that it is to maximize the total happiness of people. And for socialists, it would be equality, freedom, and fraternity, but they put more emphasis on equality. So let's say that it's equality for socialists. And these objectives will impact the way that these ideologies consider government. So, as you could guess, libertarians, they will favor a minimum intervention of the state, and they will be very hostile to the welfare state because it stifles individual freedom. And according to the libertarians, the pursuit of social justice is not only fruitless, it is dangerous. Fruitless because they consider that the notion of just and unjust, it can just be applied to circumstances which have been triggered by the action of individuals. So the outcome of forces such as the market, the distribution of goods and services, it cannot be good or bad, just or unjust. So social justice has no meaning. And then it's dangerous because it could jeopardize the market order. The liberals give a greater distributive role to the market, which is seen as an equalizing force, but only if it aims at achieving society's goal, which is maximizing the total utility. Then we have some differences between liberals because this objective has been criticized by John Rawls. Because if you want to maximize the total utility of your people, it could actually justify to harm the less wealthy if this enables you to maximize the total utility and the total happiness of your people. So for John Rawls, justice should be the primary aim. For socialists, the state has a very significant redistributive role. But here again, we have some distinctions to make between the democratic socialists, who are in favor of a mixed economy, and private markets can have a role as long as it is modified by state intervention. On the other side, you have the socialist Marxists, for whom market is inherently in conflict with society's aim. So I hope I did not confuse you too much, but we have to keep in mind that there is always this dialectic between freedom and equality. And whether one is more important to you, your vision of society and social protection policy will be different. So let's take the example of the 2010 healthcare reform in the US. The main element of the Obama's reform was universal coverage and the health insurance mandate, which stated that you had to have medical insurance or you have to pay a fine. And there were many arguments in this debate, but we could see clearly an ideological split between the proponents of universal coverage and people who could have been considered as more libertarian. And for example, Republicans said that they were against this universal coverage and health insurance mandate because it was an infringement on the rights of individuals. So we can see that in this case, these people put freedom on top of everything, and then maybe equality comes second. Now it is your turn to speak, and I would like you to share your country experience, telling me first what other factors could shape our vision of society and social protection. Second, how do you or your country balance equality and freedom, and do you think that it affects the way that social protection policies are designed? And lastly, that your country tend to favor big or small government, contributory or non-contributory schemes, universal or targeted schemes. And of course, I don't ask you to choose one, it's not so clear, but I would like to know how you would balance them all together. For example, sometimes universal coverage is accepted for certain benefits and not for others. This is the case for Thailand, where universal coverage has been very well accepted for health, but the government has been very reluctant to establish a universal child allowance, even though we showed that the cost would be very similar. So I finished my presentations, and I think now we can have a nice discussion on the points that I just raised.